Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about species interactions. So in a previous lesson, we talked a lot about roles of different organisms in an ecosystem, or more specifically, how every organism has a specific niche, a specific role or part that they play in an ecosystem. So this lesson is going to speak a little bit to that. We're going to specifically talk about species interactions, and more specifically, something called symbiosis. So symbiosis is when there is a close relationship between two species where at least one benefits from the interaction. So on this first slide, we have something called mutualism. Mutualism is an example of symbiosis. It is a relationship between two species in which each benefits. So both organisms in the relationship benefit. So an example of this would be pollination. So bees receive nectar from the plant and spread pollen for plants. So we have two species in this relationship, the bees and the plants, and both benefit because the bees spread the pollen for the plants, and by doing so, this increases pollination, or like the reproduction of plant species, allowing them to grow. And it also benefits the bee because bees need to consume pollen in order to produce honey. So it's like a mutual relationship. They both benefit from the interaction. Another example of mutualism, guys, is, and you might have heard of it before, but a specific type of bird, an oxpecker, is something that lives on zebras or rhinos. And this is a mutualism example as well because both species benefit. The bird eats all the bugs and the parasites from the rhino or the zebra, so that bird benefits because it gets these bugs and parasites for food. And then the rhino and the zebra benefit as well because they're having these bugs removed from their bodies. Another example would be a sea anemone and a clownfish. So again, you might have heard of this before, but a sea anemone has the ability to sting fish, but the clownfish has a mucus on its skin that keeps it safe from the sea anemone's sting. And so this interaction benefits the clownfish because it has a safe place to live, but it also benefits the sea anemone because the sea anemone gets nutrients from the clownfish's waste, and the clownfish also scares off the sea anemone's predators. So again, a mutualism example because both species benefit. Okay, another example of a symbiotic relationship or symbiosis is something called commensalism. So we have one individual benefits and the other neither benefits nor is harmed. So this is an example where one of the species benefits from the relationship, but the other one is unaffected. It's not benefiting, but it's not being harmed either. So an example of that would be a remora on a shark. So a remora is a specific fish species, and they have this disc on their head that allows them to attach to larger animals. And so the benefit here for the remora is that it gets to eat all the leftover food from the shark's eating behavior and eating habits. But the shark is not affected by the remora being attached to it. So again, the one benefits, the other is not harmed. Okay. The third example of symbiosis is something called parasitism. So this is when one individual lives on or in and feeds on a host organism. So this is where one species benefits, but the other one is harmed. Okay, so an example of this would be tapeworms or parasites in cats and dogs. So the tapeworms or the parasites are going to benefit because they're taking all of the nutrients that, say, the cat or the dog needs in order to survive. And then this is also obviously putting the cat or the dog at a disadvantage. It can be very harmful. It could even lead to death. So this would be an example of one organism benefiting and the other one being harmed. Another example of this one, guys, is you might have heard of a sea lamprey before. This is an invasive species, which we're going to get into the next couple lessons. But a lamprey is an organism that attaches itself to different species of fish. And again, it attaches, the fish becomes that host organism. And the lamprey just takes all of the nutrients, all of the good things that, the fish works so hard to get, and kind of leaves the fish left with nothing. Okay, so those were the 3 examples of symbiosis. Now we have a couple different types left over of species interactions that we're going to talk about. Okay, this next species interaction is called competition. So this is when 2 individuals compete for the same resource. So for an example, cheetahs and lions, they both feed on antelope. So in the food chain or the food web, these guys have different roles, but they do feed on the same prey. So these 2 organisms, cheetahs and lions, would have to compete for the same type of food or the same resource, in this case being the antelope. Okay, so different organisms and ecosystems have to compete for food all the time, especially if they have the same food source or the same prey that they're going after. Okay, and lastly, we have a predator-prey relationship. So in this type of relationship, the predator is a species that feeds on another. The species being fed on is the prey. So an example here would be the lynx preying on snowshoe hares. So like I said, all organisms play a role in an ecosystem or in the food web. And in this case, the lynx role would be to be the predator of the snowshoe hare, and the snowshoe hare's role would be to be the prey of the lynx. Okay, and you guys have a couple practice pages in your booklet. That is species interactions.